there's about a third of the electorate which is NPP. And we wanted to try and do some sort of a segmentation to understand in that NPP, are they really folks that are truly want to be independent, or are they really folks who just don't have a home to place their independent mindedness? And we didn't have the resources to do that study. And in fact, we also saw the transition of someone giving up their brand affiliation with one of the traditional parties, or even their brand affiliation as an independent, as being a hurdle to get them involved with the party ultimately. And so we said, let's do both. That is, we're creating the movement, the common sense movement, and you can join that as simply as by signing up on the website. But we are also creating a party for those who want to take the next step and actually join a party. And the reason why we decided to actually go with a party is really threefold. First, in California, the way the campaign finance rules work, and it's similar in other states and at the federal level, there is a limit as to how much any individual can donate to a candidate, which puts a tremendous disadvantage on an independent candidate who isn't running through a party system, because that candidate can receive money from the party in almost unlimited amounts. And so a major donor who wants to support a specific candidate can only give that candidate in California running for state legislative office, $4,300, and they're done. But that same donor can go and give 10x to the party, who can then turn around and give that exact money right back to the candidate. So we really wanted the functionality of a party in addition to the movement. The other two reasons are more to be determined. The second is the brand identification and or the simplicity of being able to say, when we're fundraising, hey, we're working on raising a third party. It's very difficult to get the idea of an independent movement across quickly when you're making a fundraising pitch. And then lastly is just the organizational benefits of having an ongoing political organization that will be there, work in a grassroots function to help this candidate this year in this city council race, but maybe in the next year, a different candidate for a state legislative race or an initiative campaign. So we wanted to build that ongoing concept of an institutional movement and party together.
Nick, your thoughts on that?
Well, since this is a political forum, I'm going to give you a fun political answer. It depends. I think by state location and which opening it would be. I'm here representing the Alliance Party, which came together, I think the idea came together here in Denver at one of the events back in October. So yeah, it's been less than a year and a half. It was a number of, how do I say this, major minor parties that actually collaborated and all sort of dropped their names to have the Alliance Party, which is basically a very collaborative group running under a few fundamental ideas such as campaign finance reform and a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And then still collaborating with a lot of other groups, very supportive of United America. I think some of our board speaks to Sam weekly. So it's to use their label if you were going to be a candidate would be fantastic in a lot of places, and I would totally support that. On the flip side, when I ran as an independent, and I don't know if whether the Alliance Party or Common Sense Party or somebody else had been around in 2018 and offered me their insignia, I would have taken it. And in fact, Colorado has two major parties, obviously, and then 4 minor parties on the ballot, 2 of which I sought and got the endorsement from, but wouldn't carry their label. So there's a Unite Party here that has nothing to do with United America. Unity Party, that's what they're called. And then, anyway, 2 of them I actually got their endorsement, but didn't want to use their name, and instead went through the signature process, because in that moment, in my district, in 2018, I believe that the moniker itself was just killing us. And I thought going in as an independent made a lot more sense in that instance. But I think, particularly when you're talking about money, until we reform that system, that really does matter. And having that kind of support, or even having something to go to, one of the biggest issues when running as an independent, you know this better than I do, is people, they find interest in you because they don't immediately know what you stand for and who you are. On the negative flip side, they don't know what you stand for and who you are, and they want to dig into that a little more, rather than just saying, oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, so whoever wears that label, I'll just blindly vote for.
Okay, and we'll talk about marketing in a minute on that. Michael, your perspective and Sam's perspective.
Yeah, I agree with virtually everything that's been said already, but I'll add just a couple of little nuanced points. Fundamentally, we came to the conclusion that the party organization, the organization of being a party, affords a political candidacy of non-Democrats and Republicans to run. On the day after the election, there's a chance that your candidate might not have won, which we all know. And at that point, if there's no organization or infrastructure there to own, maintain, and then reuse all of the data and the information and the lists and the email addresses and the fundraising effort that you did during the independent candidate, essentially it all kind of evaporates. You have to start all over again every year. So one of the fundamental decisions we made as a movement first, a Serve America movement first, was that we have to become a political party. And I will tell you, I've been in business my entire life. I'm not a political person. I know politics pretty well through my business association with Washington. I was a cable guy, and this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, this is really hard in the United States. We don't have an electoral system in this country. We have 50, and they're all different, and they're all designed to stop people like us from doing what we're trying to do. Right. And by the way, the referees, the players on the field, the owners of the team, they're the guys that make the rules and enforce the rules. The Democrats and the Republicans in control of the state legislatures and the Congress. So if you think about it, it is totally rigged. It is a duopoly. By the way, if anybody knows the power of a duopoly, a cable guy does. And you don't have to break the law to be like a monopoly when you're a duopoly, because it's just two people in the room, and they both know what to do, and they're both doing it in every state. And in fact, if I could go here now, we got on the ballot in New York under the rules of the 2018 election by the gubernatorial race. We had a fabulous ticket, a Republican lieutenant governor candidate from a small village in Westchester County. The gubernatorial candidate was a woman from the Democratic Party from Syracuse, New York. She was the mayor. They were terrific candidates. We needed to get 50,000 votes in New York State to become a party for 4 years. That was the rule. That was the money we spent to get on the ballot. That was what we did, and we got 56,000 votes, and it was really hard. Right? But as of this week, New York State has somehow enacted a non-legislative change in the rules for being a minor party in the state of New York, which essentially will require all minor parties to get at least 130,000 versus the 50, or 2%, whichever is greater, of all the votes cast in an election, not only in the gubernatorial race, but in the presidential race, so you have to do it every 2 years. So essentially, all of the minor parties in New York, short of any action being taken, are essentially going to be kicked off the ballot in 2020. So, I mean, talk about playing hardball. That's what we're all up against. We need to know that.
Yeah, I think it's important when we heard earlier today about this as a marathon, not a sprint. I've often said that the two parties have been very dedicated and very rational for a very long period of time in service of one goal, and that is staying in power. And we have to be equally dedicated and equally rational. In fact, you both mentioned campaign finance limitations that candidates have relative to parties. I think most of you are probably aware that the FEC was put into place in 1974. But the impetus for that was a financier, a guy named W. Clement Stone in Chicago, handed Richard Nixon's bagman $2 million in cash for his re-election campaign in 1972. And that so offended people that they formed the FEC. They put in limits on what you can give to candidates and what you can give to parties. It was $1,000 for a candidate, $5,000 for a party, unless you were a Democrat or a Republican party. In that case, it was $25,000. So even in the height of reform zeal, with a picture of a guy handing a briefcase with $2 million in cash in it, the Democrats and Republicans made sure that they created an institutional advantage for themselves to the tune of 5x. Before I go on to the next question for the panel, are there any comments or questions related to what we just talked about?
Mike Murphy, I was just going to ask you a question. You kind of touched on it a little bit. So there's three parties that you guys are joining: California, national, sort of national, I don't know about SAM. Do you see it as a benefit, or is there need for more kind of coordination between these different parties that you guys are setting up, or do you see it as a benefit of having the?
Should there be 3 or 1?
Well, I think ultimately we all need to get our stuff together. Where we are right now is we're all kind of putting our toes in the water, trying to figure out what the best strategies are. I can't tell you that the SAM strategy is definitely the one that has to work, and it's by far the clearest strategy. I'd like to talk a little bit about our avoidance of getting into the trap of the left, right, center political conversations that everybody wants us to have. Democrats and Republicans want to direct all political conversations into where do you stand on this and where do you stand on that, when in fact really the underlying problem in this country is not where we all disagree with each other on specific policies. We can come together on that and figure, Gang of 8 or Simpson Bowles. I mean, even Democrats and Republicans can figure out how to do it. They just can't figure out how to pass it.
Right.
So we have a fundamentally dysfunctional system in place, and what we're trying to do is to change the conversation. So not be tagged as a moderate or a centrist, because then they're going to attack us as not having principles, and we've all seen this before. But in fact, a system or a process that leads to good fundamental solutions where reasonable people can get in a room with different points of view and come up with answers. So that's a direction that we're trying to take the political conversation that I think is different. And it may not work, but it may.
John, 3 or 1? Is there a reason you decided to start the Common Sense Party instead of the SAM affiliate in California?
Yeah, absolutely, and again, I'll give my same answer, which is yes, it's actually both. I think there will be a time in the future when maybe a lot of these state level organizations can roll into one grander organization. But I think that I just was lucky enough to have a conversation with some of the Reform Party founders who went through the Ross Perot experience in the 80s. And one of the things that they said, to your point, Michael, was the complexity and the expense and the attention that was necessary just to get on the presidential primary in 50 states consumed almost all of their organization's resources. And so what we tried to do was, was really a reflection maybe of my background as a project developer in renewable energy, which is you have to be local and you have to be an expert in the subtleties and nuances of that local jurisdiction in order to ever get a wind farm or a solar farm built, right? Which requires you to live there and be intimately involved with that community. Therefore, I think a nationwide effort is great and it's necessary and it will come together, and I agree with Michael, I don't care what we call it or who's in charge of it. That maturation point will come in the future, but in order to get there, in order to get the breakout momentum against the duopoly, I think we need to specialize in each of our areas, whether it be Colorado or Sam went through the process of starting nationwide and really kind of realizing that they needed to focus resources on New York and Connecticut. I'll let Michael speak to that. And what we're just trying to do is focus only on California, make an impact and make a breakout kind of statement. And if we are successful and our handbook works, we'll print 49 copies of it for everybody else. But I know California, I spent time in California, that's my expertise. and I couldn't tell you how to do anything in Kansas.
I would say that whoever party has the winning candidate can start being a leader. You know, if your party has a success, then maybe you all will buy Darwinism. Everybody will gravitate towards the first winning group, and then we can ascend. So it's a process of working together to get candidates to win, and then that person or that candidate can help become a leader with you all.
It's interesting, we've got a couple of sort of analogies there. One was in Minnesota, where it was Hubert Humphrey who brought together the Farmer Labor Party and the Democratic Party after he rose to electoral success in the city of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
So to your point of someone being successful and then trying to organize. And I think the thing we've seen with the National Association here, you know, the meeting that I went to in California in November of last year, I was shocked because if you went a year prior to that, in the meeting we had in Kansas, there were 55 different reforms going on. When we got to California, after we saw the success of ranked choice voting in Maine and in some municipalities, about half of the people who were there to talk about reforms were talking about what they were doing locally on ranked choice voting. You know, we sort of saw a success, and then everybody decided to gravitate to that success.
Greg, can I add in one thing on that? I got my notes out here. In answer to that question on bringing, that's the whole point of the Alliance Party. And I think they're not on the ballot in New York, but would love to start working with Sam, and if there was a candidate, I think they would fully support that. But interestingly, when they came together in October, it was the American Moderates Party, the Modern Whig Party, and the American Party of South Carolina, which also added to it the Independence Party of Minnesota, the American Alliance Party 2019, and then prior to that was the USA Party, Veterans Party, American Centrist Party, Center Party, and so on. So it was this idea of doing exactly that, trying to bring in a lot of these things. And I believe officially we are on the ballot, or able to access the ballot or throw anyone on the ballot in 37 states and counting.
Charlie?
Could you talk a little about the voter fusion laws? Because I know it affects you guys in New York. I know that Greg has looked at it legally. And then more generally, do you think there is room for legal challenges against many of these impediments against independents and small parties that are at a minimum inimical to what the founders intended and may also fall to legal challenge?
Why don't you address it as to New York, and then I've done a lot of research on fusion, and I'll address it.
Well, New York is a fusion state right now. We're not sure if it'll stay that way.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Well, if you have no other parties, there's nothing to fuse.
There's nothing to fuse. Interestingly, New York City, there's a big victory for ranked choice voting in the last election. I went into New York City and voted for it, and I felt really great about it. And then 2 weeks later, they announced they're going to wipe out any chance of it actually having any impact by trying to get rid of all the minor parties. But we have fusion voting in New York. SAM became an official party in early 2019 after the gubernatorial race. We actually had 104 candidates running on the SAM ballot line in 2019 in November. 90% of them were fusion candidates. They were running on other party lines too. That, by the way, is not a long-term strategy for SAM. We're not anxious to do that. But in New York, in order to get yourself established and working and on solid foundation, you have to kind of play by the rules of the state, which is again why having 50 different state rules and 50 different state organizations. This is really hard stuff. Every state is different. Oz Griebel over there ran for governor as an independent in Connecticut with the SAM endorsement. He didn't run on the party because he couldn't, because Connecticut's rules are different. Although he's now heading our effort now as a movement in the state while we try to become a party in Connecticut, which will take years. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but every state's different. And, by the way, right. By the way, of the 104 candidates, 52 of them, half of them actually won. And a lot of them attribute an extra boost from the SAM ballot line, even though it was often Never Land on the right side of the ballot, to putting them over the top because they were close races.
So reasonable amount of research into this, and so fusion balloting, for everyone's benefit, if you're not aware of what fusion balloting is, it's just the idea that a candidate can receive the endorsement of more than one party, and that candidate can therefore appear twice on the ballot, once as a Sam candidate as an example, and once as a Democrat, or once as another minor party candidate if they want to. Fusion balloting really got outlawed in the United States at the turn of the century. There are only 6 states right now that allow fusion balloting. And the reason it got outlawed was because with the advance of the Populist Party and the progressive movement, what ended up happening was there were a lot of populists who fused their ballot with a minor party, Democrat or Republican, in various states and ended up winning elections. I'm very familiar with what happened in Kansas. In 1900, in Kansas, we had 5 of 7 congressional districts go from Republicans to Democrats because of the fusion arrangement with the Populist Party. And one very popular Kansas Republican senator lost his seat. When the legislature convened, they were still dominated by Republicans, and the legislature went ahead and outlawed fusion balloting. The Populist Party quickly challenged that at the Supreme Court in Kansas, but at the time, the Supreme Court judges were popularly elected, and so 5 of the sitting 9 Supreme Court justices recused themselves. And so there was never a hearing challenging the fusion ballot laws in Kansas. And in 120 years, it's never been challenged in Kansas. And frankly, it was challenged at the federal Supreme Court. William Rehnquist in 1996 wrote the majority opinion upholding Minnesota's anti-fusion ban. And it is probably the most roundly criticized legal opinion that's ever been written, maybe with the possible exception of Rehnquist v. Gore, related to the 2000 election in Florida. But every major law review article that's been written about the Rehnquist decision in '96 points out it's factually wrong, that they made all the wrong assumptions. They in fact argued, the state came in and argued, well, we have an interest in maintaining this. The opposing side came in and provided all sorts of data and evidence to suggest they have no interest in maintaining it, and yet the Supreme Court said, well, the state just has to assert an interest, they don't have to prove an interest. And so I think it could be roundly challenged legally if someone wanted to take it up. The benefit of fusion balloting, by the way, for minor parties is not necessarily electoral success, but generally it allows voters to express policy preferences. So, you know, if there were fusion balloting in Florida as an example, Ralph Nader may have gotten 2 million votes. He might not have won this, or not Ralph Nader. Al Gore might have gotten 2 million votes if he got the Green Party nomination as well. And then everybody would know, gee, I owe my election to my stance on environmental issues. I better maintain my environmental position or I'm going to lose out. And Kathy, you might comment on that for me. Or
I think your point's it's a really important point, and I appreciate your pointing out the fallacies in that Supreme Court decision. I've been active in third-party politics for many, many years, and now I'm working really outside of organizing that party. But I think the thing that I wanted to share, I just commend all of you for doing the very, very hard work of trying to create the Fusion gave us a really important opportunity, it also is fraught with problems, and I wonder how all of you think about this dilemma. I think it's a dilemma for all of us reformers in working in third-party politics. Because the rules are so hard, and because in many states, especially New York, Connecticut, the rules are set up to really allow the major parties to meddle in the business of a third party, changing the rules, re-registering people and taking over the party, on and on and on, and this is what we're going through in New York now, yet again. How do you fight against the dynamic of self-preservation of the party as a party and the way the system is set up to kind of foster and in some ways reward corruption of the original mission of the parties and their founding mission?
Well, I think, Kathy, as you well know, in New York, the whole system has been morally challenged because a lot of the minor parties in New York, there's probably 8 or 9 of them on the ballot this year, are wholly owned subsidiaries of the two major parties.
Exactly.
And they do whatever they're told to do because they need the money to maintain their ballot access every 4 years.
Right.
We may be the only party on the ballot right now that really and truly has absolutely no affiliation with any of the other parties. We had as many fusion candidates running as Democrats as we did as Republicans, so we don't have any loyalty to one side or the other. But we do have loyalty to our philosophical view of how candidates and then office holders should behave while they're in office, and that that is the one thing that people have to sign off on. We even have a quantitative scorecard that is in the process of being rolled out for the 2020 election. That people will actually have to take the scorecard test, and if they don't score a certain score in terms of their commitment to open government, to electoral reform, all the things that we stand for, then they can run on a party line.
I'm going to change course here for 1 second and ask Nick a question, who's the one candidate on the stage who's run as an independent. What did you see as the greatest obstacle to running as an independent, and what did you do to overcome it?
Well, yeah, Greg has far more experience than I do, but for me, it was very much a solo journey. We didn't have a lot of backing of any major group. We didn't have a lot of backing of any major party, clearly. The two minor parties that I did go out and seek endorsement from, they weren't strong. It just, I guess it made me feel a little better, and also to keep them off the ballot. Because in my district, the Libertarians, who I went to get an endorsement from, ended up deciding to run a candidate after our conversation because I had laid it out for them in a way that this district made perfect sense in this moment for somebody to, anyway, so, and I beat the Libertarian, but that was upsetting. So, I remember one very distinct conversation with our current governor here in Colorado. It was an old friend, he was the seat holder, so this was an open seat, one of the many reasons that made it just seem the perfect timing. But he called me one day and he said, why don't you go try for the Unity Party's endorsement? I said, I actually already got their endorsement. He goes, oh good, you're going to be one of their candidates. I said, no, I'm going to be an independent. He said, well, you can't possibly get enough signatures to get on the ballot. I said, Jared, it's 800 signatures to get on the ballot. How could you not, the amount of, it to me, and I love the guy as a friend, but the amount of this negative belief in anything that didn't have a DNR that ran across every facet of what we did. I went to every Democratic meeting, I went to every Republican meeting I could, and I showed up to an indivisible meeting in Denver, ran into a friend, and she was running for office as well, and she goes, what are you doing here though? You're the enemy. I said, I'm not even a Republican, this is a friend. 2 weeks later, she was up in Fort Collins in her district and pulled into her driveway, and somebody drove by and shot at her garage, which is abnormal in Colorado. Obviously freaked her out. She went into hiding, etc. Blamed it on the Republican she was running against. She's running as a Democrat, and came out with this long piece on why can't we have civility in politics, and why do we ever use the word enemy? Anyway, so.
Well, if I were to answer my own question, I'd say we had two real challenges running as an independent. The first was getting staff. And it's one of the reasons why I think what Unite America and others in this room are trying to do in terms of building institutional capacity is so important, because the same people who are running reform campaigns are developing the skills and expertise to be able to run candidate campaigns as well. I was lucky enough to be able to run into Jim Jonas sort of by happenstance. He was frankly probably bored with what you were doing and thought he'd take on this race that seemed like a real long shot race. And so for me, getting staff was a critical issue. Getting quality, competent staff is very difficult, I think, as an independent. The second thing is I think there's a basic gravitational pull that gets placed on independent candidates. You talked about it a little bit, Nick, but there's this sort of vicious cycle of the press saying, we're not going to provide you coverage, we're not going to consider you a legitimate candidate. Then it makes it difficult to get your ideas out there, you don't register in the polls, and then the press says, see, that's the reason we didn't cover you, is because you didn't register in the polls. And it's a vicious cycle. What we decided to do, we ran a very vigorous sort of campaign, we did bus tours, we did everything, but the strategic decision we made was before the Republican and Democratic primary, we went out and we ran ads for a month. And I had the benefit of being able to call on a lot of folks that I've worked with previously to provide campaign contributions. And we got to the point in 2014 where by Labor Day, we were in second place. And at that point, it sort of flipped the script. That whole, you can't win, we're wasting our vote voting for an independent, became, well, we'd be wasting our vote if we voted for the Democrat. And the Democrat dropped out. And so that, that one decision to spend early money, and it's something I say to every independent candidate, if you're going to break through the gravitational pull, sadly, you're going to have to spend money earlier than your opponents would normally spend money if they don't have a contested primary. And so in my mind, that was the decision. In 2018, when I ran for governor, we had sort of the same challenge, but what ended up happening was a lot of folks who had committed dollars to us ultimately didn't come through because they got much more invested in this battle to create a mechanism to hold Trump accountable. Right. And so, people who had written pretty significant checks to independent expenditure organizations in 2014 and had committed to writing them in 2018 didn't write them. And so I think Jim, the poll that Jim did right at the primary, we were at 19%. The Democrat was at 32 and the Republican was at 38. The Republican was so objectionable, we sort of knew at that time, everybody's going to coalesce around the candidate they think most likely can beat him, and it's not me. And so, we broke through that gravitational in 2014, that gravitational pull in 2014. In 2018, we weren't able to, and sort of by mid-September, we knew it. And so, we pulled all our ads and we basically, continued to campaign, but continued to campaign in a way that allowed me to get our ideas out there, talk about the reforms that we needed, but with the recognition that we weren't probably going to win, unless there was a dead body.
Have you been able to get just $1 billion in there around that prime, right before that primary, where you could have been in second place, which would have done exactly what happened?
Yeah, and this was sort of reminded to me, Mike Pompeo is the Secretary of State. He's a former representative from Kansas who's thinking about running for Senate. And even Pompeo, who should have the ability to raise, more money than anybody, before making the announcement, made a pilgrimage to Las Vegas to talk to Sheldon Adelson, and made a pilgrimage back to Kansas to talk to Charles Koch, and is lining up the money. And that's always been my advice to independent candidates. You got to know where you need to get to break through the gravitational pull and the resources you need, and don't do it if you can't line them up.
Can I piggyback on that, because it's a comment that relates to this? The biggest staffing issue we had a lot of volunteers out of the two schools, CSU and CU, that was great. But the big political science departments, but the biggest issue was campaign management, because their name went on the website or whatever else. I went through 3 of them, because I could not find somebody who understood Colorado, was good, and wasn't afraid to burn their bridges. And our motto was almost, the bridges I'll burn will light my way forward. It was a joke, but it was, if you were already taking the lead, then you had to convince somebody else who was well enough adept in the system to also leave their system. That right there was why it would have been great to have a party supporting us. And on media, I got in 9 of the 11 debates. I thought getting in the debates will give me the free media, and it did, to an extent. I was the first third-party candidate to ever be endorsed by a newspaper in Colorado. And we got the highest vote count in Colorado for a third-party candidate, although it meant nothing when it ended up. It was Kavanaugh that really was our final nail in the coffin. But CPR, which is an affiliate of NPR, after talking our way into the Denver Post and Rocky Mountain and whatnot, not Rocky, Daily Camera, that one's gone, but talking our way to all the major newspapers to finally get them to do an interview, even if we knew they weren't going to endorse it. NPR, of all places, wouldn't even interview. And I thought, you of all people, but it's the media, CPR, the affiliate, but still, it's just like, it is across the board.
But we faced a bigger challenge with public radio in Kansas, which is they had one interviewer. Whenever I did a public radio interview, who would travel to wherever I was to interview me. And his wife was Kathleen Sebelius' former Secretary of Transportation, and someone they tried to recruit to run as the Democrat, and he was very much on team Democrat. So, debates are interesting. I quit with people. I had 5 debate trophies from 2018. I got 3 debate trophies in 2014, and I came in. I didn't win either race. So,
if I could also add to my experience in New York, where we ran. By the way, Sam was an empty vessel decision. It was a conscious decision. We didn't want to identify through its name what the party might quote stand for. We would have to build that. And we knew that was a harder task. It would take money and time to build what SAM stands for. We're just rolling that out now. But in the election, we had terrific ticket running, and they were great campaigners. And they got about 60% of the vote that the Libertarian got, that the Green Party candidate got, who were really not great candidates. And it became very apparent that there's a lot of what I term as unearned votes in an election, where people don't know the candidates, don't want to take the time to figure out who those candidates are, but they look across the party labels and they think they know what that candidate might stand for just by the party, and the 2 parties they know are Republican and Democrat, or in some cases Libertarian, Green, conservative parties, and those minor parties got more votes than we did because people voted for the party and not for the candidate.
I'm going to tell a little story, and then I'll take a question. Rob, I know you've got one. And, Jim and I spent a little time with Howard Schultz earlier this year because he was trying to kick off his campaign, and one of the things that his policy people said, he had this meeting where he had a big sort of U-shaped table, and Jim and I were there, Nick came, and there were probably, 24 people from his staff who were lining it. The policy person said, well, people are saying that Howard, they don't know where Howard stands on the issues, and so, we need to kick out all these policy papers. That's what our priority right now is. And I said, you can stop doing all that work. Because you can put 100 pages of policy on your website. You can kick out they're still going to say, we don't know where Howard stands on the issue.
Right.
That attack will stick because people aren't going to go out and read 100 pages of policy prescriptions. And so all they have to do is assert that we don't know where Howard stands on the issues. Regardless of how much policy he releases, they will continue to assert that. And my counsel to them was, make sure on every issue that Howard doesn't equivocate, that he doesn't sound like he's doing what everyone else does and says, yeah, we need to have a conversation about that. But actually have 2 or 3 sort of pithy sentences. You know, healthcare is all screwed up because it's the only industry I know of where you get paid to fix your own mistakes. And we've got to change the incentives. And then move on. But that notion that people vote for parties because they think they know what the parties stand for, it's an attack on candidates that will persist regardless of how well documented the candidate's policy position is. And it's, you know, it's a difficult fight that I think all third parties and independents have to fight. Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, there's points that have come up about the differences in different states and the impact of rules. I think it's so important in the gravitational pull problem that is tied to the plurality system. But California is really interesting because obviously top 2 allows the first round to be open, and then once you're in the top 2, there's no spoiler problem. So that's true of Washington State, it's true of Louisiana, it's actually true of Georgia has runoff elections. It's not top 2, but it sort of has rules. So there's certain states that have sort of already dealt with it, of course Maine now. And I will say one point about Maine, just to make sure people know this little fun fact, which is the 2 congressional districts in Maine, the vote outside the major parties in those 2 races was higher than all but one other congressional district in the country in 2018. Wasn't that high, but it was higher, you know, because people that quickly kind of adjusted to the reality that they could vote more freely, and I think there's opportunities for third parties that are going to grow there. But then I just wanted to say that, you know, so that's why I sort of attention to the rules. But 2 quick things. One, on the fusion thing, I just want to make sure people are aware of this sort of a fun way you can put fusion and right choice voting together if you accept a comma approach, like the endorsement is on the same line, and then you can have them together, and that actually deals with some of the challenges of the third party needing to get a certain number of votes on its own line, but they can just get it with the candidate. And then you can have both political expression that way, and organizing that comes with it. And Oregon does that. It doesn't do ranked choice voting yet, but it would be a good example of a state to do it. But I'm just wondering how to deal in this climate where people still care about the choice between the major, or care more than usual about the choice between the major parties. You're seeing this right now in the UK, where the Brexit issue is kind of like the Trump kind of thing. And just how do we do it? Like what's a smart tactic in the states where they don't have good rules?
Well, you know, we're running short on time right now. One of the questions I wanted to ask was, are some of these rule changes really a prerequisite to success? And I think that's something everybody here probably agrees, that rule changes will be dramatically beneficial. I do think we are in an environment right now where people are making a binary choice. I think it's going to be more challenging right now. We saw it in 2018. Far more challenging right now for independents and third parties to gain traction. That still doesn't mean that there isn't a need. And again, if we take the long view and do the organizing right now, I think when we move past this environment, and particularly someone like Donald Trump, who's a very polarizing figure, I think we are going to be basically laying the groundwork for the future. You know, I was on Smirconish the other day talking about Michael Bloomberg's run and would he be better off running as an independent, and Smirconish brought up that 44% of Americans self-identify as politically independent, and we all know there's some challenges with those numbers and what they mean. But the more interesting number to me is that roughly half of Democrats and Republicans believe we need a third party. And I think that's telling that today they're going to continue to fight this blue-red fight, but they still have one eye looking for alternatives, and I think the foundational work we're doing, in 30 seconds, because I want to give Michael an opportunity to show a video before we end. Okay.
Sure, perfect. Well, in fact, this question is exactly how we've structured the strategy in California, and I'll try and do it in 30 seconds. But really based on some insightful analysis from Dan Howell, we are adjusting our target a little bit and taking the long view. So Trump's creating all this noise, it's sucking all the air out of the room. In California, we just changed 10 years ago, we changed our, 8 years ago, our term limits rules. So now, essentially in our 120 legislative seats, there's only 6 open seats in the next cycle, and only 7 open seats in 2022. But if you took 24 and 26 cycles, 2/3 of our state legislature will term out. So what we're doing in order to beat the breakout inertia issue is focusing on some targets of opportunity in the legislative races where we think we might be able to get somebody into the finals for the top 2. We also recently have good news that a existing seated legislator switched from Republican to MPP, which is great. And lastly, we're focusing on local races, which in California are nonpartisan municipal, county, school board in 20 and 22 in order to get people in the right place so that they're ready to challenge in 24 and 26 when 2/3 of the legislature turns over.
That's great. Kai, are we able to run Michael's video real quickly? It's a 2-minute video. Sam has a video that they put together that they wanted to show, and I appreciate everybody spending the time to be a part of this group.
Very quickly, we spent the better part of this year rethinking the whole centrist movement. The parties are gravitating towards their extremes. We all have tried to seize the middle ground and the reasonable central positions. And we found that it doesn't really work, because centrism and moderates are defined differently by everybody, and then misdefined by the 2 parties who are going towards their extremes. So we came up with this approach that I think in 2 minutes tells the story, which is very different from the typical.
And we refuse to settle for a broken political system. We know what you're thinking. Great, another political party, because that's worked so well in the past. And you're right. Trying to fix the system with another party is a long shot at best. That's fine, because we're not just another party. SAM is a radically different kind of party. Every party has a platform. For most parties, that platform is an ideology, a list of rigid positions on issues. It's black or white, and it never compromises. It also never gets anything done. It just plays to the extremes and keeps dividing us. SAM's platform isn't an ideology, it's a process. You're probably thinking, what the hell does that mean? And where do you stand on the issues I care about? So let's talk issues. Every issue is important, complex, and affects all of us in different ways. But most importantly, every issue represents a problem that needs a solution. And our process creates a clear framework to find solutions for any issue. Every SAM candidate will listen to their constituents so they can understand the problem and how it affects the people they actually represent. They'll seek input for solutions from lots of different sources, regardless of party or position. And they'll work together with colleagues on all sides to find the best possible solutions for everyone involved. This process probably seems obvious, but the reality is that our current system doesn't incentivize leaders to listen to their people and solve problems. It only rewards extreme partisanship. SAM's process-driven platform inverts the incentives and rewards results that do the most good for the most people. Process might be an unexpected platform, but it will deliver the kind of leadership that puts people first and takes action on the issues you care about. So let's build a different kind of party, together. Let's fix the system, together. Join SAM.
The idea is we do not declare ourselves as moderates or centrists, but the result of that process, that's exactly who we are. And people will figure that out, and we can't be attacked for calling ourselves that by the 2 parties.
I appreciate